Hello, Shayna. We're going to finish this thing. I hope this is working. All right, we have done everything for Thomas Paine and Common Sense, and we've read Common Sense, hopefully, and we've done all the review, and I'm hoping that you've kept up with everything thus far and that there's no questions. I'm recording all these in advance if you haven't noticed, and so I don't have an idea of how this is going to actually go, but hopefully we make it. We're down to the last two lessons. Actually, this could be one lesson. This could be the final lesson, which is great. And it's the biography of Thomas Jefferson, because that leads us into the Declaration of Independence, which you will read, and that'll be the last thing you read in this course. So let's just jump into Thomas Jefferson, nicknamed the Apostle of Liberty, born in the colonies. He's born in Virginia, Shadwell, Virginia in 1743. Let's see. Super smart dude. By age 17, he was fluent in Latin and Greek, and he attends a college at the age of 17. He goes to the College of William and Mary, studies law in college. Wicked smart guy. He spends 15 hours a day reading and studying. 15 hours. You can picture how many, if you were to start reading this morning at 8 a.m. and you read for 15 hours, you know, how long is that? It's a long time. 3 hours a day he spent practicing the violin. He was also a violinist. And the remaining 6 hours was eating and sleeping and other bodily functions. Became a lawyer after he graduated. Worked in Virginia, mostly disputing land titles and things like that. Pretty boring work. He was a very shy person. If you ever saw Hamilton and you saw Daveed Diggs play Hamilton, you know, and he's got the pink thing and he's all flashy and, you know, that's not Thomas Jefferson at all. Thomas Jefferson was really shy, really quiet. He was incredibly intelligent, and he kind of lived in kind of his own little world inside his mind and was not much of a talkative dude. However, he still falls in love with someone named Rebecca Burwell. And he starts thinking about her all the time, and he writes in a letter, "I think of her too often. I fear for my peace of mind." So he was falling in love with this lady. So he decides to court her, and he tries to figure out what's he going to do to court this young lady. And so he hears that there's a ball, like a dance that's happening, and she's going to be there. He knows she's going to be there. So he says, all right, this is my chance. I will also go to this ball, and I will prepare some witty lines and remarks and sweep her off her feet and ask her to marry me, and it'll all be great. So he prepares his little witty remarks, and he goes, and he's kind of gets her cornered or whatever, and he tries to talk to her, and he fails miserably. All he does is just kind of stumble and trip over his words, and he can't get out what he wants to say, and very awkward. And he told a friend about it later. He said, all I could do was stammer out a few broken sentences, uttered in great disorder. So his shyness was getting the best of him. So he was really bummed that he blew it. And so he said, well, I still want to court this young lady. I'm still enamored with her. So how about, since the ball didn't work, I'm just going to go straight to a proposal of marriage. So he just flat up finds her and goes up to her one day and talks to her and asks her to marry him. And as you might imagine, she says, no. Let's see, 1768, Thomas makes two big decisions in his life. One is he builds his mansion. So he's got enough money to be building himself a mansion. He's obviously doing pretty well as a lawyer. The mansion's name is called Monticello, and it's in Virginia, near Shadwell, Virginia. It's on the back of a nickel, which I don't have, but if you ever find a nickel and you look at the back of it, that's Monticello. The second big important thing he does in 1768 is he decides to run for public office, to get involved in government. And the reason he's doing this is because he can see the boilings around him of what's happening, and he wants to be involved. So he goes to the the Virginia Congress, and in Virginia, the state Congress was called the House of Burgesses, Burgesses. Burgess is just an old-timey word for representative. So it's just an old way of saying House of Representatives, but the Virginians had to have their little flair, we're the House of Burgesses. So that's what that is. So he runs for office to be a representative or a Burgess. He gets elected, and he's now a representative in Virginia. So he's kind of got this two-faced thing going on in his life. He's got this now public career in politics. He's in the House of Representatives, which means everybody can see him. He's out there. But his private life was still very private. His social life, he's very quiet. He does get married. He is more successful later. He, in 1772, a couple years later, 4 years later, marries a wealthy widow. Her name is Martha Skelton. And then a couple years after getting married, he writes another document called a tract, Tract. And let me just tell you what that is. A tract is a type of pamphlet. So you should remember what a pamphlet is from the Thomas Paine lessons. A tract is a specific type of pamphlet, and what makes it specific, it is specifically containing a declaration or an appeal. That should sound very familiar. This particular tract was called, it's got a very long title, A Summary View of the Rights of British America. And he was basically doing kind of similar to what Thomas Paine was doing. He was writing grievances against the king. All this Tea Party stuff was happening, and the taxes and all this nonsense. And so he writes this document while at the House of Burgesses attacking King George III. Again, so him being a representative launched him into the public circle. Writing this tract made him famous in the colonies because he was such a fantastic writer that the tract spread like wildfire, and all the who's who in the political world at this time had read it and realized how fantastic of a writer he was. And just so happens a lot of those people were going to be delegates at the 1775 Second Continental Congress. And they said, you know what, guys? We need to get this Thomas Jefferson dude to come from Virginia, to come up here to Philadelphia and be part of our Second Continental Congress, because clearly the dude can write. So they asked him to do this. He's actually appointed. He's appointed as a delegate to the Continental Congress. And as the quote says, as he's coming into town, on June 20th, 1775, a 6 foot, 2 inch tall, gangly man with reddish brown hair, hazel eyes, and a burnished complexion rides horseback into Philadelphia. His shyness and his quietness prevented him from participating in the debates, but the delegates did not bring him in to debate. They brought him there to write because he was a writer. And they had a very specific idea for a document that they wanted to write. And it was a document, foreshadowing, that expressly states the reasons why the colonies are justified to break free from Great Britain. And they want the man, Thomas Jefferson, to write this document. He doesn't participate in any of the debates. He just sits there, and he is drafting his ideas on how he's going to write this document. And he's given the assignment, and he writes it, and it's the Declaration of Independence, which you're going to read. And we consider this document to be the founding document of the American tradition. This is basically where it starts. And in the opening, he talks about how all men are born free, which comes from where? John Locke. natural rights. That's born free is the second one, liberty. And he talks about how all men possess the same natural rights. Notice I'm using the word men. Back in the day, that was the language. They didn't say men and women back in the day. So it's kind of the archaic, old school language. Let's see. Also in this document, he proclaims that the sovereignty, which is who's in charge, who's leading, who's sovereign, is the people. The people have sovereignty, which means the people are in charge. The monarchy does not have sovereignty. The monarchy is not actually in charge anymore. We are now in charge of ourselves. First document, not only in our history, American history, but in the world history, where anybody came up with such a document, where they said the monarchs are no longer in charge. We are in charge now. Huge point in history. Let's see. So he writes his first draft. He submits his first draft on July 2nd, 1776. He says that he's not trying to be original, but rather he's trying to capture the expression of the American mind. And so a lot of what he's writing looks like other writers at the time, because he's reading all these other things and he's really just trying to summarize what everybody else is saying. That's why there's actually a conspiracy theory out there that says that Thomas Jefferson didn't actually write the Declaration of Independence, but rather Thomas Paine wrote the Declaration of Independence. And the reason people have that conspiracy theory is because the writing is so similar. You might notice this when you read it. And the reason it's so similar is because Thomas Jefferson was reading Thomas Paine like everybody else. Like he was hot to trot. His common sense was the bomb diggity for a revolution. So anyway, yeah, so July 2nd, he submits his first draft. Interesting thing about his first draft was that Thomas Paine had a paragraph in there. And maybe I'll put it on the classroom just so you can read it and just see what it is. It was called the Assemblage of Horrors paragraph, because in the verbiage he uses that wording. And what this paragraph was all about was anti-slavery, which again is really fascinating because Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. So he was not an abolitionist. Remember, Thomas Paine was an abolitionist. He was against slavery from day one. So was Alexander Hamilton, by the way, if you didn't know that. They were both huge abolitionists at the time. Thomas Jefferson, on the other hand, he had some slaves. So it's interesting that his first draft, he includes a paragraph against slavery. I'll include that for you to read. And it's interesting that the Second Continental Congress, when they read this draft, they cut that paragraph out. They don't want that in there. Very fascinating. They make a total of 41 corrections to his draft. But other than that, they're really happy with it. And on July the 4th, the second draft comes out, the one that we know of today and the one that you are going to read. And let's see, is there anything else I can say about it? Oh, he talks about something that you'll read about called self-evident truths. And I'm going to ask you a question about self-evident truths and what do you think they're related to? And the answer is probably pretty obvious. Anyway, I think I'm done with Thomas Jefferson. I think that's the last video lesson. I think we're done. Whoop-de-dee-doo. All right. Talk to you later, Shayna.